1940. The continent of Europe is falling like a house of cards. The German war machine seems absolutely invincible, terrifying, and completely unstoppable. But let us fast forward just 5 short years to 1945. And the capital of the so-called thousand-year empire is nothing more than a smoldering, radioactive pile of rubble. How did a military juggernaut go from conquering France in a mere 6 weeks to getting absolutely obliterated on all fronts? Well, the answer isn't just overwhelming Allied firepower. It was a masterclass in catastrophic self-sabotage. You see, winning battles is one thing, but winning a global war requires actual strategy. Welcome to the 7 deadliest mistakes that cost the Axis the war. Let us begin with mistake number 1, the infamous Halt Order at Dunkirk. It is May 1940. Over 300,000 British and French forces are desperately trapped with their backs to the sea on the beaches of Dunkirk. The elite panzer divisions are practically breathing down their necks. Victory is entirely in the bag. And then, inexplicably, they stop. Hermann Göring, a commander whose ego was perhaps larger than his military competence, convinces the high command that his Luftwaffe can finish the job from the air alone. It was a colossal blunder. The Luftwaffe fails due to bad weather and fierce Royal Air Force resistance. Thanks to a miraculous civilian flotilla, 338,000 Allied soldiers escaped to fight another day. Those very same soldiers would return to haunt the Axis 4 years later. But the terrible choices were just getting started. Which brings us to mistake number 2, losing focus during the monumental Battle of Britain. By late 1940, the Royal Air Force was on the ropes. German bombers were systematically destroying British airfields and radar stations. Britain's air defense was literally days away from total, irreversible collapse. Victory was imminent. But after a rogue British bombing raid on Berlin, the German leadership threw a massive tantrum. They ordered the Luftwaffe to stop hitting airfields and start bombing London instead. This gave the RAF the exact breathing room they needed to recover. Mistake number 3, Operation Barbarossa and the sheer arrogance of ignoring history. In June 1941, the Axis launched the largest land invasion in human history. Against the vast Soviet Union, the High Command famously declared, "We have only to kick in the door and the whole rotten structure will come crashing down." They were, to put it mildly, spectacularly wrong. The initial advance was indeed terrifyingly fast, capturing millions of Soviet troops in massive, unprecedented encirclements. But the German military planners made a fatal, almost comical logistical assumption. They genuinely believed it would be a quick, easy summer campaign. Consequently, they simply didn't bother packing any winter clothing for their troops. No heavy winter coats, no anti-freeze for the tank engines, no proper snow boots. When the infamous Russian winter finally arrived, with temperatures brutally plummeting below -30 degrees Celsius, the entire German war machine literally froze solid. Advanced panzer tanks absolutely refused to start. High-tech weapons completely jammed. And elite veteran soldiers suffered catastrophic, debilitating frostbite in the freezing snow. The Soviet Union, meanwhile, was fully prepared. They possessed practically limitless manpower, rallying millions of completely weather-adapted soldiers from Siberia to defend the motherland. And far beyond the safety of the Ural Mountains, massive Soviet industrial factories were rapidly churning out thousands of robust, winter-ready T-34 tanks. The sheer, unimaginable vastness of the freezing Russian steppe slowly and methodically swallowed the invading army whole, leaving them trapped in a white hell. It became a devastating logistical nightmare that quickly turned the supposedly invincible military into a frozen, starving, and desperate shadow of its former self. Now, you would logically think that fighting a brutal, relentless two-front war against both the British Empire and the vast Soviet Union would be more than enough of a strategic challenge for any single nation on Earth. It was already an impossible, suicidal task. But no, the Axis leadership was about to make a sudden decision so strategically incomprehensible that it instantly sealed their fate forever. They were about to deliberately invite a sleeping giant to the deadliest party on Earth. Let us talk about the catastrophic mistake number 4. On December 7, 1941, the Empire of Japan launched a devastating surprise attack on the American naval base at Pearl Harbor. Now, Germany was not legally bound by any treaty to declare war on the United States unless Japan was attacked first. But inexplicably, just 4 days later, Hitler voluntarily declared war on America. It was perhaps the most baffling strategic suicide in modern military history. In one sweeping stroke, he united the world's greatest empire, the world's largest land army, and the world's most formidable industrial powerhouse against him. The United States instantly transitioned into the ultimate arsenal of democracy, mobilizing its massive civilian workforce overnight. American factories began producing ships, planes, and tanks at a rate that completely defied logic, vastly outproducing the entire Axis combined. To put this into perspective, American shipyards were launching brand new Liberty ships faster than the German U-boats could possibly sink them. Within a single year, massive fleets of American heavy bombers were joining the British Royal Air Force in the skies over Europe. They began a relentless, round-the-clock bombing campaign, turning vital German industrial cities and military complexes into absolute ash. Meanwhile, endless convoys of American supplies, food, heavy boots, and transport vehicles were flooding into the Soviet Union. This vital lifeline, known as the Lend-Lease program, kept the immense Red Army fully motorized, heavily armed, and extremely deadly. By voluntarily inviting the United States into the European conflict, the Axis powers absolutely secured their own inevitable and fiery destruction. They didn't just kick a hornet's nest, they explicitly invited the entire angry, heavily armed swarm right inside their own house. The sheer strategic blindness required to look at the staggering American industrial capacity and say, yes, let's fight him too, remains one of the most staggering, incomprehensible unforced errors in the entire history of modern warfare. Let us turn our attention back to the freezing east. Mistake number 5, the absolute, fatal obsession with Stalingrad. By late 1942, the German army in Russia was bleeding heavily. Their primary strategic goal was the oil fields of the Caucasus, which they desperately needed to keep their war machine running. But the leadership became fatally obsessed with a city that bore the Soviet leader's name, Stalingrad. Instead of securing the vital oil, they split their forces, sending the elite 6th Army into a brutal, meat-grinding urban conflict. In the frozen, shattered ruins of Stalingrad, fast blitzkrieg tank tactics were completely useless. It was a terrifying sniper's war. Fought room by room, floor by floor, and street by street. The casualty rates on both sides were absolutely horrific. While the German army bled in the city, the Red Army launched a massive pincer movement, completely encircling the entire German 6th Army. Despite his veteran generals literally begging for a tactical retreat to save the troops, the dictator rigidly ordered them to stand fast. It resulted in the total annihilation of over 300,000 veteran soldiers, who were abandoned to freeze and starve in the freezing rubble. Following this unmitigated disaster comes mistake number 6, the catastrophic delay at Kursk in the summer of 1943. Instead of striking quickly while they still had a slim chance, the German High Command delayed their offensive for months, to wait for the massive new Panther and Tiger tanks to arrive from the factories. This arrogant delay gave the Soviets exactly the time they needed to build the most extensive, deadly, and complex defensive network in human history, consisting of endless minefields and deep anti-tank ditches. The result was the largest tank battle ever fought. The delayed German armored divisions drove straight into an unbreakable wall of Soviet steel. It was a decisive, back-breaking defeat. After the disaster at Kursk, the offensive initiative on the Eastern Front was permanently lost. Forever. Mistake number 7, the Phantom Army and the failure of the Atlantic Wall. By June 1944, the Allies were preparing for the massive D-Day invasion. But German intelligence had been utterly compromised. The Allies created a brilliant fake army, complete with inflatable rubber tanks, fake wooden airfields, and endless phantom radio traffic, convincing the High Command that the real attack would absolutely come at Pas-de-Calais. They bought it completely. When the actual, massive invasion finally hit the beaches of Normandy, the German response was entirely paralyzed by a bizarre, completely dysfunctional command structure. Nobody knew who was actually in charge of what. The vital panzer divisions, which could have driven the Allies right back into the sea in those critical early hours, were simply held in reserve. And here is the ultimate historical punchline: only the dictator himself had the absolute authority to release them into battle. But on the early morning of D-Day, He was sleeping soundly, and his terrified generals absolutely refused to wake him up. By the time he finally woke up on his own and authorized the deployment, it was far, far too late. The Allies had already secured a permanent, unbreakable foothold on the continent. The impenetrable Atlantic Wall was completely breached. The sheer hubris, the constant obsessive micromanagement of his brilliant generals, and the total disconnect from reality, turned the entire military campaign into a slow, agonizing, and inevitable march toward total collapse. The war ended not with a grand victory, but with a defeated dictator hiding in a subterranean bunker, utterly destroyed by his own colossal ego. In the end, the greatest weapon the Allies had wasn't just their industry or manpower, it was the strategic incompetence of their enemy.